Actually, we probably won't do collection view the more I think about it. And the other thing we're going to do next week is iPad. Because everything we've done so far is iPhone. It's time to start doing some iPad. Okay? So let's go back to Attributor. So I'm going to get Xcode up here. And let's close drop it. Stop that task. We can quit that. And sorry, let's go back here. And I'm just going to bring up Attributor as we last left it here. Remember, this is what Attributor's user interface looks like here. We don't need to see the code at all today because we're going to do all of this auto layout stuff in Xcode. And let's see what Attributor does right now. So let's run Attributor just as we left it off. And here it is. Here's Attributor. Remember, we can do this kind of stuff, pick these things. And if we rotate, and everyone saw on Piazza the way we rotate is we hold down the Command key. It's basically this right here, Command arrow. Okay, so I'm going to do Command arrow. That looks pretty bad. Okay, in fact, that's horrible because we've lost all of our control. No outline, no colors. We can't really do anything here. Stats still looks okay, but it's kind of cut off. That's not so good. ... So really, this whole UI did not react well. And so let's try and fix it so that it stops doing that. And this is going to be in some ways almost too easy because we dragged all these things out using the guidelines. So I'm just going to go down here to the TIE Fighter, and I'm going to say reset to suggested constraints. And pretty much that's going to do it. So let's just rerun. Okay, we could make a quick look at some of these constraints just to see what it's doing. But like this, let's get this out of the way in here. So you can see that this thing is tied to the super view on the left. It's lined up with the buttons. It makes a little space in between the buttons, a little space at the top. So it's pretty much doing what we want. Let's see what happens when we rotate now. So we got this. It's still all working. Nothing has broken because of our putting those constraints in. And so we'll rotate. Ooh, that looks pretty good. I can still, for example, set my outline. I can set colors. It's great. Stats. Oh, much better. However, this is not so good. Okay? I like purple, but not that much. Okay? So we got to make these things all the same size. We want these 4 buttons to be the same size. Okay? Nothing that we did when we dragged it in, evidently, was enough to let Xcode know that. However, so simple to make that happen. I'm just going to select these 4 buttons. I'm going to go down here to this little constraint adder right here. And I'm just going to click this button that says, I want these 4 buttons to have equal widths. In other words, I'm adding the constraint that their widths be the same. Okay? So when I hit add 3 constraints, it's going to add 1 constraint to each of them, probably, each of these first 3, saying be the same as the next one over. We'll do that. And you can even see that. See, here's what they look like, equals. See? So let's go and run, see if that fixed it. And it did. Okay? So whichever way. By the way, why does it not rotate here? Because this is the upside down, portrait upside down. And in our project settings, we said we don't support portrait upside down. So that's why it just does nothing. When you go to portrait upside down, it does nothing. But when we stay with portrait right side up, or between either of the 2 landscapes, it seems to be doing exactly what we want here in this view. And the only problem is, if we look at our console, we're getting all kinds of errors here. Okay? This doesn't look too good. Okay? And what is this primary error we're getting? Unable to simultaneously satisfy constraints. Okay? So this looked all good over here. There was no, I don't see anything, there's no yellow things. If I bring up my document outline, there's nothing yellow here. My auto layout constraints are good. Well, actually they're not, okay? Because it's unable to satisfy the constraints at runtime, okay? Well, why is that happening? Well, it actually gives you a lot of help as to why that's happening. Let me make this wider. Here, and it gives you even kind of ASCII text kind of descriptions of the layouts. You see how everything's laid out? But I can probably guess already that since I just introduced this error, it has something to do with what I just did, okay? Which is to make those widths be the same. So let's take a look at the constraints of these buttons and see if we can see something obvious, okay? Anyone see anything obvious in here? that doesn't look very good? Speak up.
The width equals 64, it's hard-coded?
Yeah, the width equals 64 here is hard-coded. Okay, that's a magic number. That's bad. And in fact, we know that when we go to landscape, the width's not going to be 64 anyway, right? They all get a little wider in landscape. So this is the problem. It's trying to make those buttons all the same width, but it's trying to keep them all 64, or at least to keep this one and this one and this one 64. This one seems to not have that 64, which is nice. So this is easy to fix. I'm just going to delete these width equals 64s, not the height equals 64. So let's delete the width equals 64. Let's delete this width equals 64, and we'll delete this one. Okay? So this height, nothing turned yellow. Okay? Nothing was like missing constraints. Okay? It's all completely still specified. And now if we run, okay, and we rotate back and forth, still working, still making the buttons wider, and we're not getting anything in our console here. Okay? So sometimes you'll get the constraints. They won't have any problems in Xcode, but you still might have some conflict. So you should be looking at your console to see if there's conflicts. Question?
Why did you keep the height equals 64 magic number?
Okay, so the question is, why did I keep the height equals 64 magic number? And that's a super good question. Now, it's okay that I have a magic number here. And why is that okay here? That's because there's no text in that button. It's almost like an image, right? So what size would it be otherwise? There's nothing, if you look from top to bottom in this view, there's nothing that would specify what size it is, because this is not a fixed width, or height rather. This is a fixed height, and so is this and this. But then how much space goes to this and how much goes to this? By fixing this one at 64, this one gets the rest. Now, I actually could do this another way. If I kind of wanted, the text view to have most of the space and this, some of it, and I want it to be a minimum size, I could actually set the size here to be greater than or equal to some particular size. And I could use the content hugging priority and compression priority between these two to make sure that whichever one I wanted to get the extra space when it got taller, like this, okay, I could make that be defined. But by fixing this one, I'm guaranteeing this one gets all the extra space. So when you have an image, I said that sometimes a magic number is okay. Usually it's when you have an image. Some artwork that somebody has drawn has a size to it that's its size. And here, these squares, I want them to be this size. So I'm glad you brought that up. That's a good question. Okay, the other thing I'm going to do here is play around with this. So this is working fine. Nothing to change here. What about this guy over here? Well, this one's pretty bad. I kind of drag these in here without using the lines or something, so they're kind of in random spots. So here's a good chance to show you how to put these things in their place, not using suggested constraints. Okay? In other words, actually specifying. So I'll show you both ways to do it, both non-suggested constraints. So let's put outline text in this corner down here, or we'll put colorful down there, whichever. And then we'll have the other one stack on top of it. So I eventually want it to look like this and this, but I'm not going to use the guidelines, okay? Because I want to show you a different way to do it. So here I have colorful characters. So it has no constraints currently, because when I said reset suggested constraints, I was doing that for this guy only, right? When you go here to the TIE Fighter, it says in attributor view controller. It doesn't say stats view controller, so it only did it in that one. And I didn't reset it here, so these things have no constraints. So let's set this one to be in this lower left-hand corner without using the guidelines. So I'm going to do that with this guy, okay? So this little button right here, it lets you specify, this is where we did equal widths. But here I only have one thing selected, so I can't even pick equal widths. I'd have to pick two things for that. But up here at the top, you'll notice you can specify that this thing is tied to views around it, either it's super view or to other views. Okay? And also, I can pick the standard value here. So I'm using the default value, okay, which you generally want to do. You don't want to have magic number like 171 in here. But I'm not picking these I-beams, so those are not going to be affected. And you see it wants to add those two constraints. That's this one and this one. I'm also going to show you this, update frames. You can update the frames, in other words, move the view as it currently is showing in the scene, either all the frames in the entire container or just the frames that got new constraints. usually you're going to pick this one, items with new constraints. So I'm going to hit this, and what's going to happen? That colorful thing is going to jump to lower left-hand corner, standard distance away, automatically. Okay? So that's another way to set the constraints. See, it's put standard distances here. It's got these standard constraints. And how about this guy? We want this guy to be lined up on top of this one. We could do that also with this. Okay, we could set the I-beam here and all that stuff. But I'm going to use the control dragging to do that. So I'm hold down control, and I'm drag from this guy to this guy. And I'm going to have the vertical spacing. I'm using shift, by the way. Vertical spacing and left, in this case, the left edge. I want those lined up. And then I'm just going to hit return. And it created me 2 constraints for that. Bottom space and colorful character. So let's go see what that looks like. All right, so we have this. We do stats. It stays in the lower left, whether we're portrait or landscape. So that worked perfectly, and they stay stacked on each other. One thing I want to show you is this. Watch this. Let's pick a whole bunch of text here and make it outlined and colored, and go to stats. And you see how these nicely show the whole word 226 colorful characters. In other words, they don't get cut off. That's because these 2 things are their intrinsic size. What happens if instead I fix the size of one? And this is why you're going to see these intrinsic size being fixed is bad. So I'm going to take this colorful character one, I'm going to fix its width. And I'm going to do that by control dragging to itself, okay, and saying width. I could also do it with these buttons down here. And there it is, width equals 157, which is its current width. I'm just going to leave it that way. Okay, now let's run, see what happens. Okay, so it seems like no problem, everything's good. But let's select a lot of text again. Oh, not so good. You see? Since this thing is not its intrinsic size, it couldn't fit when I went to 127 characters instead of 0. Right? So it just went dot, dot, dot. I can't fit. Okay, that it always does. You can control this, but by default it does this dot, dot, dot if it can't fit. Okay, so do you see the hazards of having these hardwired widths in here? So if I take this and delete it, and run again. Now when we go to the stats, even if we have a lot of stuff, it'll fit. Okay? All right, one other thing I guess I'll show you real quick is what happens, let me show you the document outline piece of this. Okay, so nothing's wrong in here, but I'm going to make something wrong. Let me go to this guy and let's delete its align leading. Okay, so it's no longer lined up with this. Okay, when I do that, notice this one turns yellow because it is a constraint for an object that has problems. Okay, so anytime you have an object that has problems, all its constraints will be yellow or even red if they're conflicting. So you can see we've got this little red guy here saying that there's a problem with this guy, and we know what the problem is, right? We don't know where it is horizontally. We only know where it is vertically. Okay, so let's go do that. And it says needs constraint for X position. Again, I can click on this little red thing. It'll say add